What's up, everybody? Welcome to the video. This is my first look for week 6 of the NFL season on DraftKings and FanDuel. More of a casual video today. I don't have my Excel model up ready because it's so early on in the week. I do have my pumpkin notepad here with some notes on some of the players that I do want to talk about. So that's what we're working with right now. But we're just taking a first glance at the entire slate, looking at the pricing, the matchup at each position. Then we'll try to build a lineup as we talk through it. Do not have my optimizer projections or anything like that ready, but if you want to check those out, it'll be later on in the week in my core plays video. And also, if this happens to be your first time here, my name is Pennell, and I break down NFL DFS each and every single week on this channel. If you do enjoy today's content, or even if you don't, consider liking the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or mean to me in the comments, or be nice, I don't care either way, but I would love to hear from you. Okay, so let's dive into it here, and as always, we're going to start at the quarterback position because this is the foundation of our lineup. This is going to tell us the direction that we are going with our build, because what I like to do in these videos, and typically in single entries, because that's what we're building here for that kind of style of roster construction. If I roll the quarterback out, I typically want 2 pass catchers with them. Now that's if they are more so a pocket passer, because like Jalen Hurts, I'm fine with just rostering one guy with him, or if I'm even playing Justin Fields. I know DJ Moore had an absolute explosion last week, but you can play him naked, so there's some instances where that's not always the case. But like, for example, if I play Matthew Stafford here, I absolutely have to roster at least 1 pass catcher with him, because Stafford's not going to go out there with 7 rushing attempts for 80 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. That's just not going to happen. So if he goes off, that means some of his pass catchers have to go off. And that would more likely be a Cooper Kupp and a Puka Nacua. So it just gives you the direction of your build, because there's always going to be a lot of good plays. But if I roster Jalen Hurts, that means I want to roster AJ Brown with him. Then I need to run back on the Jets, which obviously is not going to be super expensive. But I can't just pick out CMC as well and ruin my stack just because I want to roster CMC. So if that makes sense, hopefully it does. But looking at the QBs this week, there's a handful that I do like. And while Jalen Hurts is always going to be a fine option, 2 is the first one I want to talk about. Just because this Miami offense is absolutely insane this year. They're just breaking yardage records and speed kills, and that's all this team is. Obviously, 2 is not too fast, but Devon Chan, extremely fast, although he's going to be out for at least a few weeks, it looks like, with the knee issue. But Raheem Mostert's fast, Jalen Waddle's fast, Tyreek Hill is a cheater out there on the football field. Looks like someone you put at max 99 on Madden and just play on rookie mode. So Tua here at $7,600. We have a 31-point implied team total here for the Miami Dolphins. The only concern here is that they're playing at home. They're about 2 touchdown favorite. I think the line is at 13.5 currently, but very easy matchup versus Carolina. So if you just want to roll the passing attack, I love Raheem Mostert in this game. He should probably be one of the highest owned players in the entire slate, especially with no Devon Chan. But Tua makes a ton of sense here just because this team can put up 30 points, 30 plus points really any single week. Justin Fields, so he had an atrocious start to the season. As you can see, weeks 1 through 3, 16, 16, 11 points, which for DFS purposes or fantasy purposes in general, 16 points isn't going to kill you. But at that price tag of nearly $8,000, it was looking a little bit rough because the rushing upside always gives him a decent floor. But the past 2 weeks, they have been extremely easy matchups, but he has done what you pretty much want him to do in easy matchups. He's had 4 touchdowns in each game through the air, which is not expected, and that's not going to continue. And didn't even have a rushing touchdown in those games, and he still had 32.9 and 32.9 points again. So obviously, you can't project him for 33 points, 4 passing touchdowns, and 300 passing yards, because that's not really who Justin Fields is. But this is, once again, another really good matchup here versus Minnesota, a team that bleeds points to the quarterback in just passing attack in general. But they're also just in defense versus the run. They're just not a good team. So I like Justin Fields here at this price tag at $7,300. If you're going to use him, DJ Moore is going to be your clear-cut option, as well as Cole Kmet. But honestly, if you are rostering Fields, you can use him naked, or I think you can get away with just using 1 pass catcher. And if you want a run back option from that Minnesota team, I know there's no Justin Jefferson. It just makes those stacks a little bit easier. So you could look at a TJ Hawkinson or a KJ Osborne, or even Jordan Addison, who I believe is just under $6,000. After that, not loving Kirk Cousins with no Justin Jefferson. I mean, I know this game should be able to put up some points and the defenses suck on both sides, but he's on the road, and with no JJ, it just limits his upside. But if we scroll down a little bit more, I think Trevor Lawrence is an interesting option for tournaments. I realize he hasn't been that great this year. Overall, pretty disappointing, I would say, for most people that drafted him in season long. He's only crossed the 20-point threshold once, and he's only crossed the multiple passing touchdown threshold once as well, and that was actually week 1 versus the same matchup, Indianapolis Colts here, whose pass defense has just been atrocious this year. I think a lot of people go to ETN this week after his monster game in London, which I get. It's another good spot here, and I believe the implied team total here is at 25.25. 4-point spread here at home, so I think ETN will be the more popular option. So if you want to get a little bit different, you could go Trevor Lawrence. You could play Calvin Ridley, which I know has been really disappointing outside of his week 1 matchup versus Indy. But the pass defense really sucks here, so I don't mind it in GPPs, but definitely not a cash option for me. Joe Burrow at $6,300, another guy that I think is viable here. Threw the ball nearly 50 times last week versus Arizona, and we finally got a good game out of this guy. He did say he was feeling the best he has had all season, and ended up putting out his best fantasy production game, which is good because I did put him in that core plays video, so I was a little bit worried about that, but he came in really low owned and absolutely smashed. Obviously, Jamar Chase, a nuclear game as well. But another decent spot here versus Seattle, playing at home. Team total here is currently at 24.25, 4.5 points spread in the Bengals' favor. This game does feature a 46.0 runners. Nothing too spectacular, but at that price point at $6,300, it's just kind of hard to pass up if we can get somewhat similar production. Obviously, we can't account for 50 passing attempts and over 300 yards every single week, but if we're going to get classic Joe Burrow back, $6,300 is just too cheap of a price point, so I would throw him in the tournament pool. I don't think he's going to be a cash option in this matchup versus Seattle. Matthew Stafford, I like a ton here at $6,100. I feel like I've been on the Rams a lot this year, whether it's Kyron Williams or just the passing attack in general, or Puka Nacua. And while Stafford hasn't really been the best thing for DFS purposes this year, at his cheap price point, this is the most expensive he's actually been all year. But it's a really good spot versus Arizona at home. They do have a 27.5 implied team total, which is the second highest on the slate, only behind the Miami Dolphins. 6.5 point spread here. We're in a dome, so don't have to worry about any weather. And I believe looking at some of the forecast or some of the things I've saw this week, there is some wind on the East Coast this week, so it's way too early to even worry about that, but just something to look out for. And I realize the price is up on Stafford just a little bit, but when you get Cooper Kupp back, obviously it's going to help things out. And him and Puka Nacua, there's going to be an unstoppable duo this season. So as long as this game is competitive back and forth, which it should be, and Arizona just got absolutely shredded by Joe Burrow, I like the entire Rams offense here. Now, the stacks are really not that easy. It used to be early in the season when Stafford was free and Puka was free, and now we have Kupp in the mix, and Puka's nearly $8,000, or I think he actually is $8,000, so not as easy as it could be, but I do think this entire offense looks viable, and added the fact that Kyron Williams is in the mid 6K range in a really good spot. I mean, you can just sign me up for pretty much all the Rams this week at their price points. And if you were looking for a cheap quarterback, I am not loving much down here, but Baker Mayfield, if you do want to stack up this Detroit-Tampa Bay game, which I know is not the prettiest thing on paper, only a 43.5 point over-under, 3-point spread, but I think it has sneaky potential here because we know the Lions offense can put up points, and I wouldn't say their defense is the best thing out there. And while Tampa isn't the most exciting team these days, Baker is capable of putting up 20-plus fantasy points, and it's a good spot versus Detroit. They should be trailing in this game. I'd prefer if it was in Detroit because you're playing in the dome, but I'm not going to worry too much about it. But at this cheap price point, you have really easy stacks to make with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and assuming Amon-Ra St. Brown's healthy, you could use him or David Montgomery. I am fine with either. But if you're trying to get gross this week, Baker is the one cheap QB that I think looks somewhat interesting, unless you want to go the Gardner Minshew route with Anthony Richardson being out. So now we have to pick a quarterback, and honestly, I like a lot of these guys, so it's kind of hard to pick just one. But let's roll out the Matthew Stafford stack here. Not sure we're going to be able to afford Puka and Cooper Kupp, so it'll be a tough decision to make. But I do like the Rams this week, so we'll roll them out. And moving on to the running backs, while CMC stands out as the one standalone expensive play, I don't really see myself going to him this week. First off, it's a terrible matchup versus Cleveland. Their run defense and just defense in general this year has been amazing. But also, I find myself more happy with the expensive wide receivers this week. We have Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and there's a couple more. So that's probably the route I'm going to go. And especially in this build, I have Matthew Stafford, so I'm pretty much tied to either Puka or Cooper, depending on what kind of salary I have with. I'd like to get both, but might not be possible. So we're going to have to forego CMC, even though the volume and usage and the talent is elite. And the big news this week is that Devon Achane is going to be out. So we don't have to worry about playing him at $7,400 with his 10 carries and 100 yards and 2 touchdowns every single week, which it's not sustainable, but I'm just saying the dude's a freak. He's amazing, the game of football, but he just can't average 12 yards per carry throughout the entire season. At some point, he's not going to bust off 100-yard touchdowns. But hopefully he gets healthy soon because he is really fun to watch on the field. David Montgomery, I do think is viable here at $7,300, whether Jahmyr Gibbs plays or not. We're just going to be locked into heavy volume and a bit of a blowout last week, so the backups got some burn there, but 19 carries, still over 100 yards, and got into the end zone off a long touchdown and had 6 targets. Obviously, if Gibbs plays, you probably won't see the targets there, but the week before versus Green Bay, 32 carries, 121 yards, 37 fantasy points. he's got a touchdown every single game so far with the Lions. And if they're on the goal line, he's going to be the guy. We're pretty much locked in for close to 20 total touches here. So if you got the money for Monty, I don't mind it. Travis Etienne, I like him a lot this week at $7,100. The Jaguars should put up some points here versus this Colts defense. And if you don't go with the passing attack for the Jags, makes a lot of sense to get some Etienne. And he's also involved in the passing game as well. So the floor is pretty high for him. And the ceiling is also extremely high. Also one of the tops in the entire league for running backs that in routes run this season. So elite usage out of Etienne, and we know the talent is extremely high. Alvin Kamara at $6,800, a great matchup versus Houston. We know the run defense isn't anything really to be too concerned about. Unfortunately, we did not get the 14 targets we saw in this first week back versus Tampa Bay. And while that probably will never happen again, keep in mind the Saints are absolutely blowing out New England Patriots, so there's really no need for that. They can just run the ball at the end of the game. So if this game isn't a complete blowout, I would expect probably 5+ targets for Alvin Kamara here. So he's definitely going to be in play at $6,800. Kyron Williams, since we have the passing attack for the Los Angeles Rams for this specific build, probably won't be rolling him out, but he's going to be one of the top running back plays on the entire slate, plays a boatload of snaps, and leads the league in the running back position in routes ran. So it's just elite usage, elite opportunity, so I do like him as long as he can find the end zone. Even if he doesn't, he should still be double-digit points, but obviously he wanted to fall into the end zone. Raheem Mostert, assuming he's going to be healthy, we do have the Q tag here, but no Devon Achane this week. Jeff Wilson is lurking in the shadows, keep in mind, but this should be Mostert's backfield, and I would imagine he will be one of the highest owned players on the entire slate. If you are going to get 15+ touches as a running back in this Miami Dolphins offense, you are going to be extremely valuable. Now, over on FanDuel, I believe he's almost $9,000, so the price is kind of insane over there. But Mostert's RB2 and PPR scoring so far this year, and he's just been a touchdown machine. And if he's going to be the lead back with no Devon Achane, I mean, I just don't see how this doesn't work out. I mean, it's a great matchup versus Carolina. The run defense has been awful this season, and they're also 13.5-point favorites at home with a 31-point implied team total. So the only reason you are fading Mostert is because of ownership, but even then, I'm not sure it's good enough of a reason because he's also extremely good. I know he doesn't have the luster of Devon Achane, but he's an extremely fast back who's always been efficient his entire career, and he's healthy right now. So I don't see a reason not to like him. So let's just plug him in as we go through it because I am more than likely going to be playing him. Joe Mixon, unlike Mostert, is an inefficient back, but he gets the volume, 25 carries last week, only 81 yards, but 4 targets. That's close to 30 total opportunities. And while he hasn't done much with that this year, if Joe Burrow is going to look healthy and be back, it just opens up the offense even more. So I do like Mixon. I'm not going to plug him in yet because there's a couple other guys we want to talk about, but he's definitely a candidate for that. Maybe DeAndre Swift at a very similar price point, and unlike Mixon, he's decently efficient the last 2 weeks, only around 4 yards per carry, but honestly, that'd be a pretty good day for Mixon. Prior to that, 8.1 versus Tampa, 6.3 versus Minnesota, and since week 2, when Kenny Gainwell got hurt and he was in the main role, DeAndre Swift's been awesome. 30 points, 17, pretty much 17 again. He have 10 targets the past 2 weeks combined. And he's the main back in one of the best offenses in football. Great offensive line, so that's always going to have value. Around $6,000. He gets passing game work. Really not much not to like here, so Swift is definitely in the pool here. And then if you're looking for a cheap running back this week, James Conner, more than likely, I believe, going on IR. And we also have Ingram banged up. I'm not sure if he's going to miss or not yet this week. That's something to monitor. But if we can get Amari Demercado, that's how you pronounce his name, as the main back in this offense, below 5K. If you're looking for a punt option, I'm not saying he's going to be great, but he had 3 targets last week, 10 carries. Conner played a little bit at the beginning, ended up getting hurt, but 12.7 fantasy points, did get into the end zone. That's going to have value on this slate. So if you're looking to spend up at a certain position, Amari might be able to make that work. I'm not saying he's an absolute smash play, but if you're looking for volume that's cheap at the running back position, he makes some sense. So I'm not sure exactly what route we want to go. We can either leave it open or just get a placeholder. Let's just put in Swift right now as our placeholder. And we'll move on to wide receiver. And instead of breaking down every single wide receiver, because let's be honest, almost every single one of these guys are always going to be in play because the wide receiver position is loaded every single week. Let's just do what we have to do right now. Since we have Matthew Stafford, we need 2 pass catchers with them. Now, we could enter Tyler Higbee in here as a pass catcher at the tight end position. I believe he is only $4,000, so that wouldn't be terrible. But honestly, I would love to double stack with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. It would be really fun to do so. And with Kupp being back, it's not like Puka got banned to the shadow realm. He had 11 targets in his own right, and he got into the end zone. So both these guys had really good days. Obviously, Kupp got that bonus. Take that away, it was like around 19 and 20 fantasy points apiece. And both these guys are going to be extremely viable. We remember the days of Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp both being great options. Well, I think Puka's a bit of an upgrade over Robert Woods, and they're both just going to get heavily targeted. Both should probably get around 20 targets most weeks combined. So hard not to like that. And we know Matthew Stafford can produce solid fantasy wide receivers. So let's plug in Kupp. Let's plug in Puka at $8,000. We are eating up a ton of salary, but I want to see if we can make this work. But looking at some other wide receivers, obviously if you have Tua, Tyreek Hill makes a ton of sense. With no Justin Jefferson, we can look at the Minnesota group here, which I know is a little bit cheap just because Jefferson's going to be out. So we have Jordan Addison pretty much being in that wide receiver 1 role. He's below 6K, and we know Kirk Cousins, he can get him the ball. So I like that. It's $5,700. KJ Osborne's another interesting option. He'll become the wide receiver 2 in that offense. And then we have TJ Hawkinson there at $6,600. So all these Minnesota guys will get a bump considering the absolute alpha dog, best wide receiver in the game, is going to be out for this one. Jamar Chase, if you were running Joe Burrow, you pretty much have to play him. We'll have to monitor the status of T. Higgins. But with him getting a limited practice in on Friday or Saturday last week, I feel like that bodes well for him to play this week. But we'll have to wait and see on that. Devontae Adams is a bit of a no-show on Monday night, unfortunately. A.J. Brown in Jalen Hurts stacks. Amon-Ra St. Brown and run back stacks with Baker Mayfield. Don't really love Jared Goff this week, although he did have a great game last weekend. But either way, if you are running St. Brown, it would make sense to pair him up. But he's always fine as a one-off option just because of how safe he is with the volume that he gets. Jalen Waddle also with Tua, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. Those are your pairing options with Baker Mayfield. I wasn't really seeing anything I loved too cheap this week. Obviously, Calvin Ridley, if you're going to play him, this is probably the week to do it. He went off versus Indy in week 1. Other than that, hasn't been exactly great. Pretty solid game versus Buffalo, though, which I don't think really anyone remembers because it was in London at 9:30 a.m., so I'm assuming a lot of people didn't even watch it. But 23 fantasy points, definitely not too bad there. Obviously, without Tre'Davious White, that passing defense got a little bit lighter. So it ended up working out for Ridley. But he's definitely a nice candidate for tournaments if he's going to go a bit overlooked. But really, it all just comes down to pairing it up with the quarterback that you have. So, yes, we did Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. That does not mean they're my absolute top options this week, but since I have Stafford, it just makes sense for this build. And if we're looking for run back options in this game, we have Marquise Brown, Michael Wilson at $3,800, which honestly, I'm probably going to need a pretty cheap wide receiver because we only have $3,600 left for the last 4 spots. Now, that does include a defense and a tight end, but we're still kind of cutting it close, so we might not be able to make this work, but we will at least try. But for right now, let's move on to the tight end position. And honestly, it's not great this week. If you can't afford Hawkinson, and if you can't afford Laporta, who's kind of getting in that upper echelon tier, the dude's just been absolutely solid every single week this year pretty much, especially for a rookie. Usually rookie tight ends take a little bit to get acclimated, but he's been hot right out of the gate. 9 points, 11, 22, 10, 19. Did score on a trick play last week, but I mean, the Lions are blowing them out, so they didn't really have to do too much in the second half. But Laporta's definitely been solid. TJ Hawkinson, kind of a disappointing game last week. George Kittle caught 3 touchdowns on 3 catches, which will probably never happen again. Goddard had a great game last week. Now, since we have Stafford, I mean, if you want to roll Higbee out, you could. Obviously, had a great game last week. Only 3 targets, 2 catches for 20 yards and 4 fantasy points. I would assume the addition of Cooper Kupp back in the offense, obviously, he's going to cap his upside a bit. But if you are looking for a cheap run back option for Matthew Stafford and you don't want to go with Michael Wilson, which I get, we do have Zach Ertz here at $3,600. I realize he's been a little bit hot and cold this year. Got into the end zone last week, which was nice, but if he didn't get to the end zone, we're talking 4 targets, which is okay for his price point. But 2 catches for 10 yards. Luckily, got into the end zone, but we'll plug him in for right now just because he's a nice run back option here, but it's not like I'm too excited about it. Other cheap tight ends that would be okay, Jonnu Smith, Kyle Pitts finally had a good week, and we saw Cole Kmet do some damage versus that Washington offense. Logan Thomas is coming off, I don't want to call it a career game, but I feel like it's pretty much up there. 11 targets, 9 catches, 77 yards, got into the end zone, 22 fantasy points. So he's definitely viable too at $3,500. And if this was a cash build, I might feel better with Logan Thomas over Zach Ertz. But since this is a single entry, I want to have some correlation. We're going to throw Ertz in there for right now. So we have $3,600 left. We have 3 spots remaining: wide receiver 3, flex, and defense. I'm just going to plug in the cheapest defense I think is somewhat viable. And while the 49ers offense is obviously incredible and can put up a ton of points, let's just throw in the Browns. I think that game has a 39.5 point over under, so it's going to be low scoring. And the Browns are home, and it's only a 3.5 point spread, or 4.5 point. I think it moved. So it's not too far off. So I don't think the Browns at $2,200, as good as they've been this year defensively, is the worst thing we can do. So if we go that route, we have $4,300 left for the last two spots. So we're going to need some cheap wide receivers. I don't think we're going to be able to afford a running back. And I don't really see any 3K guys that jump off the screen to me at the wide receiver position. I would like to take advantage of Justin Jefferson being out. So if we wanted to roll KJ Osborne out there, who he's even viable with Justin Jefferson playing. We did have 9 targets last week versus KC. Obviously didn't do too much with it, but we've seen Osborne have some decent games in the past. And that's with Justin Jefferson playing. There just wasn't any Jordan Addison. But now that you take Justin Jefferson out of the equation, definitely opens some things up. So we'll plug in Osborne there. And we now have $4,200 left for our last spot. And I can't imagine there's any running back that I would want to play here. So let's specify that we want a wide receiver. And we'll scroll back up. And I can't imagine the options are abundant here. You have Zay Jones at $4,100. He is questionable. I don't know if he's going to play or not. But we have Josh Downs, Robert Woods, Michael Wilson, if you wanted to go double run back stack here, but I don't really think that's necessary. Curtis Samuel, who got into the end zone, had a pretty big game versus the Chicago Bears. 7 targets, 6 catches, got into the end zone, 18.5 points. It's pretty much in back-to-back weeks as well. But Josh Downs here at $4,100, I think he makes some sense. With Gardner Minshew at quarterback, I just think that bodes well for him because you get a pocket passer over Anthony Richardson. 6 targets last week, 6 catches, nearly 100 yards, 15.7 fantasy points. I'm not going to get too picky here, so he does fit the build. And honestly, I don't think it looks too bad. And we made Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua fit, which I'm kind of proud about. It might be a little bit of an ugly lineup, but it's for a tournament, so who cares? But overall, we have Stafford paired with Kupp and Nacua, so we have the double stack option. Ran back with Zach Ertz there at $3,600 in the tight end spot. We have Mostert and Swift at the running back position. Osborne to fill it out. Josh Downs because he fit in the last spot. But if we can get 5+ targets, I will take it. And then we have the Browns defense because they fit. With that being said, guys, all I got for you today. If you did enjoy, leave a like down below. Even if you didn't, give a like as well. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. And if you have any questions, leave them down below. I'm more than happy to get back to you. We wish you all the best of luck, and I'll see you later on in the week.